to be prompt. So this session is all about partnership, really, and collaboration. Sabina and I were just discussing with Santosh, a colleague from IFC, how companies can and should be working together as they look to diversify manufacturing bases, invest in new markets, and of course drive green and sustainable investments through capital expenditure and partnerships into manufacturing in emerging economies. So really delighted here. Jack, would you mind going on mute? I can hear your Skype going off. Thank you. And so really what we want to talk about here is aligning interests, co-investment, and how the IFC can help the textiles and apparel sector achieve the SDG targets. Of course, amidst all the vital and important news about climate change and biodiversity, we should not neglect the importance of the SDGs. And of course, all of you from large companies will be formulating or have formulated your approaches to achieving the SDGs, which we have to, of course, manage alongside the other issues that companies are facing. But there are opportunities there. There are opportunities to diversify, to invest in new markets for manufacturing, and to look at how partnerships can support that and achieve economic growth and sustainable development. So delighted that Sabina and Santosh are here from IFC to make some quite brief statements about what they can do, what their organization can do to help you achieve the SDGs through co-investment. But then we want to take your questions. So if you don't mind, it'd be great if you could engage with us on video. So you can put your video on if you like. I encourage you to do so. If you want to ask a question, you can do so in the chat function on Zoom, right? Not in the Pathable one, because this is a breakout. So the chat function at the bottom of your screen. But what I would love to happen is if you can raise your hand using the raise hand function, and I can come to you and you can ask your question or make your point. Let's have an honest and open conversation in the spirit of the Chatham House rule. So please do put your video on if you wouldn't mind, and are suitably attired. I hope you are. So I'm looking forward to hearing from Santosh and Sabina, and then it'll be over to you guys, along with me, to ask some questions and to make some points. It's clear that partnership is important to help drive investment and to manage risk, and so that's really where we're going to focus today. So Santosh and Sabina, thank you so much for joining us. Sabina, maybe I'll start with you for some opening comments. I mean, I suppose the key question is the title, how can your work help support the companies and others in the apparel and textile sector achieve their SDG targets, and how does your work sort of fit in with that, particularly in emerging markets? So Sabina, over to you for some opening comments.
No, thank you so much, and thank you for having this really interesting session, and hopefully it will make it interesting. So how can IFC work with companies in the textile and garment value chain to promote development and achieve what IFC is after, which is the end poverty and increase prosperity in the low-income countries? We think that the garment sector and textile value chain is incredibly important. As it is an early industrialization sector, it is a sector that employs many people, especially in early stages as you're in the assembly space in low-income countries, because it's a labor cost-driven space. However, it also has quite a lot of impact in the material-intensive side, be it on the materials themselves or in water and pollution. So it's aligned with many objectives that the World Bank Group has set out in its strategic priorities on sustainability. And we know that industrialization is key for development. However, I think it's got to be sustainable. And sustainability we do from an environmental as well as from a social perspective. So we're looking into environmental sustainability. We can talk about what it means. And we're looking into social sustainability as we're looking into the textile and garment value chain. How do we do that? So the IFC is the private sector arm of the World Bank. We're working very closely with the World Bank. Our tools are that we're investing with private sector companies in the value chain. We have several different types of tools at hand, from investment. We can go into details, the loans, equity. Then also we do advisory services to help companies achieve objectives. And we work also more in the more innovative space, trying to support trends in technologies or new product development, sometimes not new product development necessary in your industry, but also on the financing side that we can help. I think I just leave it there. I think we try to align ourselves in our interests with the interests of the private sector companies, so we're pulling into the same direction.
Thank you. Santosh, what would you add to that? And then I'll ask both of you to perhaps detail some examples of what you're doing. I think there's nothing like a kind of example or case study to bring it to life, to talk about what these sort of co-investments and work together could look like. But Santosh, over to you for some opening comments initially.
So I'd like to add to what Sabina said. So from IFC's perspective, we are looking forward to working with like-minded companies. It has to be a true collaboration of companies wanting to achieve sustainability, and we can be a long-term partner, specifically focusing on the financing angle and the advisory angle that we can bring to companies and standardize this across large supply chains for the long term.
Thank you. So, Sabina, why don't you give us some examples of what this looks like on the ground, and tell us the story of how you've worked with a company in this space or related to this space, what you've done, what they've done, and what the outputs and outcomes can be. And then I'll ask Santosh to comment further on that.
So I think I try to give very different stories, right? So because you can engage in different parts of the value chain. So let's start with engagement in the light manufacturing space, which is the assembly. So we have long-term loans. A client of ours is Ananta Apparels in Bangladesh. So we've been working with Ananta Apparels in Bangladesh. This is a supplier they work with Levi's. They work with, they have been actually enlarging their production to offer more different products. So we've been working with Ananta for several years, both on the investment side. So we have been providing them long-term loans for expansion improvements on sustainability, but also expansion investments. And we've been working with them on the advisory side, both on the advisory for resource efficiency. We named this Pact in Bangladesh, which looks into direct improvement opportunities in resource efficiency, water efficiency, energy efficiency, chemicals that you're using. It's quite an expensive program with advisory directly to the companies. And we are working together with ILO, International Labour Organization, with a program named Better Work. ILO is the organization that conducts the audits and works with companies to improve working and labor conditions. So this is something that we have been doing directly with one company. So it's not only one part of engagement, but as we learn to know of what is happening in a company and you become a partner, we go deeper in our engagement. We also do short-term financing, I think, which is very relevant for this value chain, in that we're working with large buyers. For example, in this case, we do work with Levi's, and we do reverse factoring, whereby we finance companies that are supplying to Levi's. So it's not only one company, but it's a lot of companies in Levi's value chain, and provide short-term financing once the receivables have been approved by Levi's for the period of time that the receivables are outstanding at a discounted rate. We have a very nice program with Levi's that we are working based on their environmental standards, on the Levi's standards. So we have cleared Levi's under our standards. So we know that their systems are in concurrence with what we are expecting companies to work with. We have our own performance standards in IFC, but then when we implement the short-term financing, we're looking at the Levi's environmental standards to do differentiated pricing. So we're trying to give a carrot, not a stick, for suppliers to perform better. So if you are under the Levi's system, I think it's a gold, silver, bronze system. If you're a gold, you get the best pricing. If you're silver, you get the average pricing. If you're bronze, you get the worst pricing. If you're less than bronze, you get nothing, because we can't finance it. We know you're not within our standards. So we have looked at the Levi's standards. We cleared the standards under our performance standards. And then we're working with Levi's to implement a differentiated pricing system. So we're doing this with several large buyers in developed or in brands We work right now with Puma, Nike, and other brands implementing this kind of differentiated pricing to improve or to help companies, give them an incentive to improve their environmental and social performance. But this is based on the buyer's demand and on the buyer's creditworthiness. So in order to qualify under the program, you gotta sell to one of these buyers that we have cleared under our program. We clear them for creditworthiness, and we clear them for environmental and social performance in their standards.
So typically, what would money that you're providing be used for? Let's talk about some sort of practical uses of it. Are we talking about building a new factory? Are we talking about improvements? Is it a whole swath of different impacts that you're looking to have with the financing that you provide? Just bring it to life for us a bit more, and perhaps you could tell us about how long it takes as well to work with you guys. What's the process? I know that in the past, sending an invoice to IFC has not always been the quickest thing to do. This is going back a number of years, so perhaps it's been streamlined. So for those who are put off by bureaucracy, just reassure us, I suppose, on process. Santosh.
Sure, and I think you make a good point. I think it's important for us to talk about how the process works at IFC. So the first point you made was what do we finance? So our financing can be used for a host of things, like the capital needed to kind of get the project underway. We do greenfields, we do brownfields. We provide instruments such as debt, direct debt on IFC's account. We take equity in companies up to a maximum of 20% of the outstanding equity of this company. We also help mobilize funds through our syndication program, which brings other private banks to come under the IFC umbrella to lend to large capital needed projects. So that is the range of things that we can do. In addition to this, we also bring an advisory piece, which, as Sabine alluded to, is the Pact for Cleaner Textiles. There's a gender program, there's a corporate governance program that IFC will do alongside its investments, right? So the IFC offers a whole range of things. We bring the advisory business together. We bring the climate advisory, the sustainability angle, and the investment services, all of it together. Now, to the point as to how long it takes. So I would say cradle to grave, it depends on a company to company, case by case basis. And assuming there are no surprises, I would assume that it is, in some industries, I have done transactions in less than 120 days, but that is not very common. It is a bureaucracy. Tobias, as you said, you had challenges in getting your invoices paid, but we do a thorough job of the due diligence. And in some cases, we've done up to 180 days on an average. So we're working constantly, endeavoring to bring that number down. And I think we're making significant strides in that process by streamlining several of our requirements as we go through the due diligence process.
So I'd like to add a little bit, is that a little bit of nuance. Yes, I think it can be slow, but it also can be fast, depending on whom we're working with, what information we're getting from our counterparts, and importantly also what kind of programs we have available at hand internally to service companies in the value chain. In the short-term financing, for example, if we have buyers cleared like Puma, Nike, Levi's, it can be really fast for a company to join that program. They have to be in compliance with these companies, with their buyers' standards, right? So then it's very fast. The only thing we're doing is then IDD check, which is for us a know your client check, right? So it's more a reputational check than a credit check or environmental check. We don't do that. When it comes to investments, like for example, now during the COVID crisis with existing clients, we had a program in place that came very quickly where we could really engage fast and do working capital support. So not only investment support, but also working capital support. So we do that with companies that we're working with. And if we see that there's a crisis situation, which is extraordinary, right? The COVID crisis was an extraordinary situation. There are opportunities to be fast. If it is the regular investment cycle that requires us to learn to know a company that we have not worked with in the past, then yeah, it might take time depending actually on the information available and on the processes that we need to go through. So how complicated and complex is your value chain? How is your business? Do we see that there are major labor issues? Do we see that there are issues on the environmental and sustainability side? If there are, we have to work them through. So we have to work with the companies we're engaging with to understand these issues and then figure out on how we address them.
And what is the advantage of working with IFC rather than with a bank, which perhaps might have a higher interest rate but might do things a bit faster? Perhaps not. I know banks that take a very long time to do things. So, but just essentially, if you're on this call, on this session, you're wondering why IFC over a state bank somewhere or another financing option, what would you say would be the optimal reason for that, Sabina?
So I think first and foremost, we don't want to compete. Right? So we really don't want to compete. If financing is available at a reasonable price and reasonable conditions to private sector companies, we should not compete. We should collaborate and try to make sure that it's working and helping, probably expand the financing into areas where it has not been available, like extend maturity, or be able to address risks that a private sector bank is not able to address. But if financing is easily available, we should not compete. So I just want to put that out. That's in our articles of association. So we are not there to compete. We are there to add and to add value, hopefully, to the financing structure and to achieving objectives through this financing. In areas where private sector financing or even state bank financing is not as readily available or not as at conditions that make it feasible, either on the financing side or on the conditionality side. So there's something there that needs to be in addition for us to get involved. That's a test that we have to run, and we're taking that very serious. I think what makes sense for companies to working with us is really the long-term partnership. And I've heard this again and again with companies we have been engaging in, is that we don't have only one product. As we're learning to know each other, we also understand better and better of how we can engage in the long run and help align our interests in working with private sector companies to achieve their own objectives, while at the same time we are achieving the development objectives that we set for IFC. So the long-term partnership is one of the major parts that I would say of why to work with IFC, and it takes time to learn to know each other, especially if it is different to working with a development finance institution than working with a private sector bank. But it pays off if there's a longer term engagement and multiple products are being used. So we have a different toolkit, we have a different reach, and we are willing to explore on how we can use that to support companies that we're engaging with.
Thank you.
If I can add something to that, to Sabina's point of long-term engagement, one is the long-term engagement and the different toolkits we have. The other is we have relationship with clients that last beyond one engagement. I can personally cite you examples of companies that we've been engaged with for the past 30, 35 years in equity, in debt, raising money, mobilizing money, and also through multiple jurisdictions. As these small and family-owned businesses in the developing markets expand, we have seen the expansion. We have been part of that expansion story with all of these companies. And in terms of long-term financing, I think the point I'd like to also make to everybody who's listening in is, in terms of crisis, what we have seen now is that IFC has taken that journey and waited for as long as it takes to get its money back with the right sponsor, obviously. We need to work with people who have the intent to pay us back when they're able. And the last point I'd like to say is, in terms of equity investments, the average equity investment that IFC has held on is average length of time is about 7 years, which is longer than most emerging market players or most equity houses that play in this segment. In emerging markets, to have equity for 7 to 8 years, and I have personally worked with a company where we held it for 30 years, simply because they were the right people, met our development objectives, and were growing in emerging markets. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very helpful in terms of clarification. Katie Fensom, let me bring you in here for a question. And also, would you mind, Katie, telling us who you work for as well? Katie, over to you. I think you're muted somehow, Katie. I don't know how. It says you're not muted on. There we are.
I double muted myself. Sorry. for security reasons. I'm joining from the biodiversity company, consultancy, sorry, TBC. And my question is actually related to biodiversity. Obviously, within fashion, one of our main interests is how the products are produced, because land-based impacts are one of the major drivers of biodiversity loss impacts on farm and off farm. So my question to the panel is that the Levi's example is a really good example of how to incentivize better practices in the midstream among manufacturers in terms of resource efficiency. But both for greenhouse gases, scope 3 emissions, and for any specific biodiversity or land use commitments, companies, including Levi's, need to reach the upstream. And I was wondering, what's the potential for IFC or others to invest in sort of those smaller upstream companies who are buying directly from farm to help them incentivize better production practices?
Good question, thank you. Sabina, Santosh, who wants to take that on? Sabina.
So I think this is a very good question, and I can promise that biodiversity is something that IFC is increasingly looking at. I think it's part of a lot of different efficiency, climate, circular economy principles that we're working on, but it's also coming up on its own right now. It's a relatively new part, I have to admit. We're working on standards right now for IFC in the biodiversity sphere, but we have it in our environment and social standards as a compliance requirement. So there's a PS, a performance standard, just on biodiversity. So I just want to say we're looking at every project, we're already looking at biodiversity, but more on, are you not deteriorating it? Instead of what you're asking for is how do you improve the situation? How do you go in a broader way to improve the way of how smallholder farmers at the end of the day you're talking about, right? Is working and work with the value chain. So there are very different programs that IFC has that go through to the farm, and I have to admit that I would have to ask my colleagues from the agribusiness side who are working that. We do a lot of work in the smallholder farmer space, working along value chains and see of how we can engage with smallholder farmers through advisory, to help them to become more efficient and productive through just standards, right? So be it labor standards, helping farmers to achieve better performance. In the cotton space, we do have direct projects with where we try to also see if we can get the larger producers involved, right? A lot more than they have been in the past. You talk about Levi's, but there's, you have, in addition, the large fabric mills and really large companies who are in between. So, how do you make that they are taking on more responsibility also when it comes back to the farmer? So we are trying from our side develop products that help companies to reach these smaller producers and at least first acknowledge that they have the responsibility and that this is where their impact is. And I think you see that there's more and more going there with the scope 3 discussion, and you have some large companies taking on more responsibility. So we look into what they're doing and how our toolkit can help. And as you see, I can cover, in the production space pretty much everything, but I have not gone back to the farm. So if I go back to the farm, I have to ask internally the specialists that we have to working with us. These specialists are sitting in our environment and social department, but they're sitting also on the investment side. We're working a lot through on the financing side with parties who help us agglomerate the small financings, right? So we cannot, as an international institution, give small loans of $10,000 or so to an individual farmer. This is not something that we can do. However, we can work with local banks or local institutions to help farmers reach financing. We have programs with companies that distribute farm ingredients, inputs, be it equipment, be it fertilizer, be it agrochemicals, and see of how we can get to farms through these kind of engagements. There's a lot of different financing schemes where you directly also finance farmers. There's weather advisory, climate advisory. So there's a lot going on that I personally know about. It's not necessarily what we do directly in the textile garment value chain. However, we would then have to connect to our colleagues in the agribusiness space.
Thank you, Sabina. And Sabina and Santosh, if you want those here to follow up directly with you, why don't you drop your email addresses into the chat function? Make it simple, so those here can follow up with you. And while you're doing that, Sabina and Santosh, I had a question for you, which is, there's an awful lot of money sloshing around at the moment for recovery from COVID, at least in the EU and the US. Obviously, IFC is headquartered in DC. How much is the COVID response and I guess the renewed efforts around the climate crisis? How much is that spurring your efforts onwards with increased investment? Is there a sort of step change happening in terms of what you're looking to do, or is it kind of more of what you've already been doing? I'm just trying to get a sense of the direction here for you.
No, IFC has capital increase interventions for the last 3 years. So we've made promises to our shareholders and stakeholders of increasing our engagement in emerging markets together with the World Bank Group. Again, we are not part of on our own. We are just part of a very big system. As part of this capital increase, we have promised to increase our engagement in core priorities. And the textile garment value chain for us comes in two priorities. One is really just reduce, as I said, it's an early industrialization sector. It's something that is really at the early steps of development, helping countries to transform from early development to later development. However, as you do the industrialization, you have to look into quality of jobs, and this is something we are really interested in, and the jobs impact together with the World Bank. And the jobs impact of industrialization. Then all the that includes all the side effects, right? Be it that you have a cultural transformation, a social transformation, the migration internally in a country from a rural area to an industrial space, the way of how they're being housed. There's so many different things to look at and to engage with. The other side where we're seeing increasing engagement also in this value chain is on our climate action plan, where manufacturing directly now has been involved as one of the core sectors, specifically in the value chains that not people see immediately, or in the part of the value chain that people don't think about immediately, which is the material space, right? So this is where most of the climate impact is, the water impact. There we're working with our agribusiness colleagues, which goes into the soft commodities, but then you have to also have the fossil fuel-based materials and the wood-based materials. So there's a lot going on. The IFC had a very large project. We have our colleague Kelly Johnson here in the Latin America region, Brazil, based to produce materials made out of wood. It was one of the largest projects that we did last year, very capital intensive. So we are increasing, and we try to do more, and not only try, we will do more. We are engaging significantly. The whole side of circular economy is another big topic we're looking into, decrease material intensity. I'm pretty sure this is part of the discussion that you have in this conference, and see of how IFC can engage. You have to really see that we have a large part of the world that has not industrialized yet. And we have a large part of the world that needs to achieve standards of living, just minimum standards of living, right? And the population is still growing. So we have to really think about it seriously on our side on how we can do more to help this to go in a direction that makes, that is not causing further harm. And I want to be very direct. I think we cannot afford having industrialization happening the same way as it happened in China. Right? I don't think that this can happen in Africa. So we want to engage, and we want to do a lot more, but we have to also see that industrialization has to happen. And this value chain, the textile and garment value chain, will be a key value chain, specifically in early industrialization, but also as you build up more material intensive production. And this is, I think, where a lot of people talk about when they speak about impact, specifically environmental impact. The labor impact is more in the assembly space. So that's what we're focusing on, and we see a lot more business coming the more we're looking into opportunities. Santosh, do you want to add?
Santosh, you were on mute. You were on mute.
No, I realize that. Thank you. So in addition to what Sabine is saying, so we are exploring several ways of how we can kind of work with clients. So I just wanted to highlight two things that we do is we have an upstream business model, which is also looking at creating opportunities, creating a level playing field, clearing any barriers to entry in emerging markets. Okay, so that's something that we are doing on a long scale basis. So we're saying we'll invest to make sure there is an opportunity for a clear sight of vision, clear sight of a project in 5 to 10 years, 5 years. And so we look at those kind of things as well. So we're long-term patient investors. So I'd like to add that to what Sabine was saying.
Thank you. And in terms of scope, Tara, you had a question about that. Do you mind if I bring you in to ask that face to face? Tara.
Thank you. Yeah, just about geographical spread of investment, really. I appreciate that there is more access to finance in more developed countries, but I'm just interested in how you prioritise that, or whether there is examples of IFC activity in countries where there still needs to be a lot of action towards the sustainable development goals, and perhaps still growers, for example, would still struggle perhaps to access finance for innovation.
Thank you. Tara, just so I clarify, who do you work with?
I'm a textile sustainability consultant, and I work predominantly with the Cotton Council International.
Okay, thank you. So, Santosh, Sabina, who wants to take that one on?
It's very interesting that it goes mainly in the cotton space. I find it very interesting. So yes, we do work in cotton, okay? And we do work with farmers in cotton, both in Africa, in organic cotton, where we try to develop the whole value chain. There is a recent project that we have developed, and we name it In Our Upstream, but it's really looking at it comprehensively all the way along the value chain and see of how we can help from the farm to the processing, help to make a regional impact there and building a cluster for production so that the farmers get a fair price and that they can develop the production practices that are required. We're working, as many of you know, with Indorama in Uzbekistan. This has been a long-standing engagement, and it's been for many, many years. Both on the financing side as well as on the advisory side, helping Indorama to develop cotton production in a sustainable way in the country. I think that project is just about to go to our board, or it has been just committed. And that has been under very strong scrutiny by, I think pretty much everyone, because this is a really very, as you all know, it's a difficult topic, right? But I really believe that only through engagement can we help everyone to go forward, and we should not shy away from difficult engagements. So IFC is doing that, but not only in cotton, right? So there are lots of different types of materials, wood-based materials, but also specifically materials, fossil fuel-based materials. And we want to look into how all these materials play a role in this value chain, and who is part of that. And there was a question of asking, is IFC only working in developing countries? No, we're not. We're working globally. We're engaging with where the players are. Our financing has to go into developing countries. That's what is in our Articles of Association. But whom we're working with does not need to be in developing countries. And as we know, a lot of value chains are global, and a lot of the players in these value chains are not in emerging markets, the main players, right? These are players who are located in Europe or in the United States or in Japan, Korea. So we're engaging with players who are having a lot of influence on what's happening in value chains, and see of how we can work and align our interests. A lot of promises that are being made regarding sustainability are being made by these major players. I think Microsoft just has made a promise to be carbon neutral within, I think, a certain number of years, and actually carbon neutral, taking everything that they've ever emitted by a number of years later. So these kind of promises are really important for us to understand of how can we engage companies and help them to get to their objectives. So in the garment textile value chain, I think there are some very large players you all know who are really good in their sustainability approaches. So we try to work with them, be it, and then at the same time, the companies we're engaging with they are in emerging markets. And we look into who are the players who are able and have the willingness, specifically you can have a company in the same doing the same thing. One of them is someone we would engage with, other it would not be. And it's really about culture. It's about, are you doing the right thing, or are you at least willing to go to do the right thing? We can help you to get there, specifically on the sustainability and labor standards. But if you're not, if it's something just you have to do because someone is asking you and just really don't really believe in it, then it's more problematic, right? So it has to be something that a company believes in and truly wants to improve. And we can then engage and help companies. So you don't have to be perfect, right? So you have to be willing to get there. And then we can work with you. We will work with players along the value chains to get there.
Thank you, Sabine. And I just put something in the chat, which we included in our blurb about the session. It'd be great to hear from you here in the audience, the apparel and textiles experts. How can IFC evolve their approaches, use their existing mechanisms to help you on your journey? I mean, sustainability is that journey we always talk about, and adaptation and evolution is needed upon the way. So I think we'd love to hear from you guys, based on what you've heard in the last hour or so, how would you hope that IFC and other related mechanisms and financing institutions could evolve to help you meet the objectives you have in the supply chain? Does anybody have a view on that? You can turn your video on and wave at me. You can put a comment in the chat function. You can raise your hand. There are multiple ways to engage. Or we can sit in increasingly awkward silence. I'm British, so I'm used to that.
I have one question.
Tara.
Hello. Thanks for allowing me in again. I just wondered how prolific you are in promoting your case studies into mainstream sector media. I mean, events like this are great, but it's a kind of a specialist audience. And also I've seen great case studies from IFC on your water work and so on coming through maybe finance media, Economist, Financial Times, that kind of thing. But I don't know if the more commercial audience who are now getting much more engaged in sustainability and the sort of CEO audience in the fashion industry would be picking that up.
It's a great question, Tara. So thank you so much. I really hear you, and we are getting a lot better on our side in communicating what we're doing. There is, as you know, any organization is a big organization and has very different kinds of pockets, right? So we're doing in our space increasing communication outreach, describing of what we try to achieve and what we're after. So we have case studies. So we have written up the Levi's case study, for example, right? So we have a lot of, both on the advisory side as well as on the investment side, we have studies on our website that show of what we're doing. We have an intranet, we have a LinkedIn manufacturing intranet. So please join. We are continuously writing up case studies and stories, and we go also a little bit deeper, right? So to really look into what is the success after we have engaged. So not only what is our intention of engagement, but also what is the success story after we have engaged, and have we achieved our objectives? And so we're looking at that, and we are publishing these success stories. The other thing that we're doing is, it's probably a little bit more, esoteric in what is the impact, for example, of AI in garments, in manufacturing, or so writing up stories that, are discussed deeply as part of a toolkit of how you can have an impact, right? So AI, smart manufacturing, new technologies, circular economy. There's a lot that we are working on, and we try to focus on foster knowledge management. That's part of our mission to get more out. But on the other hand, we also are doers, right? We're not only writing. We try to implement, and we try to invest. We're not trying, we do invest, and we see of how the impact is, and we really look of what the success is, and what has worked and what has not worked, and adjust accordingly. So please contact us if you like to get some case studies. I'm very happy to share, and Santosh is very happy to share of what we have, and we're continuously writing up more stories about what we're doing and try to communicate. It is hard to get to the CEOs, but what we learn is what is really successful is if you have success, if something works, then specifically CEOs start talking to each other. And we have seen this on the supplier finance, the short-term finance, and we see this in some parts also, specifically in certain countries, right, where people really know that what we've been doing had impact, and we can come really with a full force and change something that is important. And it's sometimes it is really good for us, and many times it is also something where we have to swallow, and especially if it goes more into the more activist kind of engagement, also pointing out what mistakes we're making, which I really like, because it's always a huge course for looking at what you're doing and improving it. It's not, but it is also sometimes hard for our clients if they're in the limelight just because they're working with IFC. And it's a lot of work if you want to improve. And I always wish we would think about it, let's get there, and let's not already be there. If we have this ambition of already being there, we cannot do anything. If we have an ambition of improving and have a continuous improvement, like in lean manufacturing, which we, by the way, also do to help companies to get more productive. But if we have that same ambition for what we are doing from all levels, be it, there are so many stakeholders in project, I think it's fantastic, because we have to improve, and we have to become more impactful, and we have to do a lot more. And there's many, many tools that we have. So thank you. I think the more people know, the more we can go out, the better.
Yeah, maybe Sabine, maybe you can post the link to your LinkedIn group on the chat here so people can join it and keep up to date. LinkedIn's not always that easy to go on and find the right group or whatever. So if you have that to hand, that would be great. Santosh, you've got your hand raised. I wondered if you wanted to come in here.
Yes, I just wanted to make a point. I mean, Tara raised a very important point about how we publicize some of these stories. What we do see is some of the successes we have has resulted in large companies coming back to IFC to look at things. So we are under our sustainability program, we are looking to support large anchor companies in the manufacturing sector to achieve their sustainability targets, including water efficiency, resources, scope 3 targets. So we are working with large companies who are beginning to hear of what IFC is doing. So in this particular case, we can't take the name of the company because this is still under progress. But what we're exploring is of doing a diagnostic study, working with the supply chain of this large manufacturer, large company, and build a pipeline of sustainability interventions, like energy saving, cleaner production, cost saving investments, to reduce water and renewable energy, and so on and so forth. But then the next part is bringing together investment piece, where we're trying to put together a risk sharing facility to help many of these suppliers take advantage of the pricing of this large supplier. So the large manufacturers. So there are initiatives underway. We need to do a better job of putting this out there, like Sabine said, and we are open to ideas. I mean, we will send you a link to our manufacturing LinkedIn, so you will feel free to reach out to either Sabine and me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We've only got about 5 minutes left, and always what happens is the great questions come flooding in the last 5 minutes, and I have to start talking more quickly and asking you to be more concise. It's just the way of the world, isn't it? Nikki Cole, you have a great question here, which I don't fully understand, so if you don't mind, I'll ask you to enunciate it yourself. And please tell us who you work with as well.
Good morning. My name is Nikki Cole, working for Reset Cotton, which is regenerative and organic cotton in India. What we like to establish is a brand, a cotton brand, but for the system, for the complete system. So from seed to soil with a soul. In that, we have many participants, and we do see that it is incredibly difficult to get them out of their own knowledge about finance. It's always a transactional point in all between these parts, and it's not yet a relational mode. And I'm just curious if you already experienced this new way of collaborating, maybe pre-financing throughout the whole value chain, sharing the risk of pre-competitive sourcing methods. Yeah.
That's an excellent question. So no, I think this is exactly what we are after, and as we are after looking into where are the power players in value chains, right? So where is who are the players who have influence? And then really looking into how can we engage them? So not that they're saying this is not my problem, it's someone else's problem, and just move on to someone else, just they can, but really try to solve the problems in the value chain by engaging. And there are so many different ways of doing so. And so when we work with large players, it's not because we finance them. They don't need our financing. Let's be very clear. They really don't. They are usually very creditworthy. They have, they are having investment grade pricing, very, very good companies. However, I think if we can get them to work alongside with us to achieve objectives in the value chain and engage not only achieving objectives, but also financially, either by the easiest way is to give their name as we do the financing. So the supplier finance, basically we can give the buyer's credit risk rating to the suppliers if you're in the value chain, right? So you're getting a very cheap financing, or that is probably not your own pricing for working capital finance. So that's one thing. We're looking into how we can use relationships. So to see of how we can use relationships in supply chains to develop programs and products, whereby we engage the larger players to take part of the risks in the financing. So that you don't put the risk only on the small part in the value chain, but you're sharing that risk with the larger player who can take the risk, and basically it's actually responsible because they demand the product, right? And they should take on a lot more responsibility. But it's really important to find the right large players who are willing to doing this. It's a culture. It's a change. It's a shift in behavior.
I have a question on that, because do we always need the big player? Because are the smaller ones then directly dependable on the big players? Can we not?
You don't have the scale, Nikki. You don't have the scale. You don't have the scale, and you don't have the credit risk rating. And the other issue that you many times have is really standards. There is a lot of requirements in the financing to work towards standards, but also in the value chain. So for anyone who is not doing this on a day-to-day basis, you have to see that from where we are, we rely on outside parties to do a certain type of work that we understand is fulfilling the standards that we have to put on any financing. So to work with many small players that are not organized in any other way is really very difficult. And on top of that, you have also the whole cost of engagement. It's just prohibitively expensive to go into all these small players by themselves if you don't have an aggregating mechanism there. So you have to see how you do that. There's not only one way on how you can aggregate. There are many ways. As I say, large players is one way. There are other ways where you have, platforms. You have very different ways of how you can aggregate players, but you have to. So we're looking into this from very different directions, from supplier finance, purchase order financing. We're looking into how we can do distribution finance so that we can help the smaller players to get access to either equipment, inputs, what they need, or advice of what they need to become better and to become more productive. But you need to find ways on how we get to them. So this has to be at scale. It has to be in a bigger way. And I think that's the thing what we're looking at.
Thank you. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. I keep running over with the session, so I'm determined to finish exactly on time with this one, and we have a minute to go. I would just say this: if any of you would like to be connected with Sabina and Santosh, I assume that's okay with you, Sabina and Santosh, send an email to my colleague Hannah. We can connect you if you didn't get the email addresses from the chat function, and we'll try, and if you can send us the link to your LinkedIn group, Sabina, we'll post that on the Pathable site. The whole conference website is available for a year, so you can go back and watch this, and we can put documents up there. Send us whatever you like about IFC's work on this, and we'll put that up there with the links to the LinkedIn group. Thank you so much for your time and commitment here to this session. It's been really, really interesting. We just can't talk all day on the same subject, so we have to bring this to a close. But Santosh and Sabina, thank you so much, and thanks to you, the audience. And anything we can do at Innovation Forum to connect you with folks like Sabina and Santosh, we're delighted to do so. So thank you all for your engagement, and we'll see you back at another session in just a moment. Thank you.